There is a birthday cake on my kitchen table. Chocolate, because that's what she always asked for. 18 candles, because that's how old she turned today. The frosting is slightly uneven on the left side, because I made it myself, the way I always made it. The way she always pretended not to notice, and then told me it was the best cake she'd ever had, every single year, without fail. The cake is half eaten now. My brother is sitting across from me, and his hands are flat on the table, and he hasn't looked up in a very long time. And I am sitting here trying to remember how to breathe. Because 3 minutes ago, maybe 4, maybe 10, I have completely lost my grip on time. My brother said something to me. 6 words. Quiet, almost gentle, the way you might tell someone that a person they loved has died. Careful. Like he'd been rehearsing the delivery for years and still wasn't sure he'd gotten it right. Quote 0, he paused. Quote 1, I didn't scream. I want you to know that, because I think people expect screaming in moments like this. And there was none. I didn't throw anything. I didn't stand up. I just sat here, in this chair, in this kitchen, with the smell of chocolate cake in the air and 18 melted candles on the table between us. And I felt something happen inside my chest that I still don't have a word for. It wasn't pain, exactly. It was bigger than pain. It was the specific sensation of your entire life rearranging itself. Every memory you have, every moment you thought you understood, every feeling you ever dismissed as coincidence or sentiment, all of it shifting, rotating, clicking into a completely different shape. The same pieces, a completely different picture. She's yours. She's yours. I have been saying those 2 words inside my head on a loop for... I check the clock on the microwave. 11 minutes now. And every time I say them, I see her face. I see her at 8 years old, falling asleep on my couch with her shoes still on. I see her at 12, calling me at midnight because she had a nightmare and didn't want to wake her parents. I see her at 15, sitting on my bathroom floor while I sat next to her, and we talked about a boy who had broken her heart. And I remember thinking, I would burn the world down for this child. I remember thinking that and feeling slightly embarrassed by the intensity of it, because she was my niece, and aunts aren't supposed to feel things that fiercely. I told myself a lot of things. My brother still hasn't looked up. His name is Daniel. He is 42 years old. He is 4 years older than me and 6 inches taller, and for my entire life he has been the person I called when things went wrong. When my car broke down at 19, when my first serious relationship ended at 23, when I lost the baby, when I thought I lost the baby. At 26, he was the one who sat with me in the hospital waiting room and held my hand and said, quote 2. He said that to me, in the hospital, while she was alive. I look at his hands on the table. I look at the half-eaten birthday cake. I look at the 18 candles, burned down to small waxy stumps, and I think about the fact that I have celebrated every single one of those birthdays. I was there for all of them. I bought gifts and baked cakes and sang off-key and watched her blow out the candles and make wishes she never told anyone. And I loved every second of it. And I never, not once, understood what I was actually celebrating. I was celebrating the fact that she was alive. I just didn't know she was mine. My name is Maya. I am 36 years old. And I need to tell you a story that starts 10 years before this kitchen table, 10 years before this birthday cake, 10 years before my brother sat down across from me and rearranged every single thing I thought I knew about my own life. I need to tell you how we got here, because the beginning of this story doesn't look like a betrayal. It looks like an ordinary life. It looks like a woman in her mid-20s who was happy, who was building something, who trusted the people around her completely. It looks like me. Before I knew what they had done. I grew up in a house that smelled like coffee and wood polish. My mother, Gloria, was the kind of woman who cleaned when she was anxious, which meant our house was always immaculate, and she was always, on some level, anxious. She worked as an office administrator for a civil engineering firm for 23 years. Same desk, same commute, same thermos of coffee she refilled exactly twice a day. She was not a dramatic woman. She was steady and warm and quietly fierce, and she loved her children with the particular intensity of a woman who had decided, early on, that her family was the thing she was going to do right. My father left when I was 9. Not dramatically. No screaming, no thrown dishes, no defining moment I could point to later and say that was when everything changed. He just gradually became less present. And then, one day, he was gone. My mother sat Daniel and me down at the kitchen table. A different kitchen table, the one in the house I grew up in, but I notice now that all the important conversations in my life seem to happen at kitchen tables. And she told us, in her steady, quiet way, that Dad was going to be living somewhere else now, and that this didn't change anything about how much he loved us. He did love us, I think. He just loved his freedom more. He moved to another city, remarried, and sent birthday cards that arrived 3 days late every year until I was about 16, and then stopped arriving at all. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a long time, and then I got tired of carrying it, and I put it down. Daniel was 13 when our father left, old enough to understand, young enough to be shaped by it in ways neither of us fully recognized until we were adults. He became, almost overnight, the man of the house. He was responsible and protective and slightly too serious for a teenager, and my mother looked at him sometimes with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and worry, because she knew what it cost a boy to grow up that fast. I was the different one. I was the one who drew on everything: notebooks, textbooks, the margins of church bulletins. I was the one who stayed up too late reading and had opinions about movies and cried at commercials. My mother used to say I had a heart that was too big for my body. She said it like it was a warning and a compliment at the same time. Daniel and I were close, the way siblings are close when it's just the two of them and one parent and a father-shaped absence in the middle of everything. We argued the way siblings argue, loudly, briefly, and without lasting damage. He teased me about my art. I teased him about being boring. We watched movies together on Friday nights and ate cereal for dinner when our mother worked late and covered for each other in the small, inconsequential ways that siblings do. I trusted him completely. I want you to hold on to that. I want you to understand what that trust felt like, how deep it went, how long it had been building. Because what comes later only makes sense if you understand that Daniel was not just my brother. He was the person who had been there my entire life. He was the person I measured safety against. When something felt wrong, I asked myself, what would Daniel think? When something felt right, I wanted to tell him first. He was my person, and he used that. I moved out at 22 into a small apartment on the 3rd floor. I was doing freelance graphic design, logos, branding, the occasional editorial illustration. It was inconsistent and occasionally terrifying, and I loved it. I had the specific kind of optimism that belongs to people in their early 20s who are just beginning to understand that they might actually be able to build the life they imagined. Daniel, by then, had been with Renata for 3 years. They had met in college. Renata was warm and organized and laughed easily and made my brother softer in ways I hadn't known he needed to be softened. I liked her immediately. Not in the polite, obligatory way you like a sibling's partner, genuinely, instinctively, the way you like someone when you recognize something in them that feels like home. They got married when Daniel was 27. Small ceremony, backyard of a friend's property, fairy lights and wildflowers and my mother crying in the front row. I was a bridesmaid. I wore a dress the color of sage and gave a speech that made people laugh and then cry, which I considered a personal triumph. I was 23. I thought I was watching the beginning of a beautiful story. I was. I just didn't know yet that I was also a character in it. The fertility struggles started almost immediately after the wedding. Renata had always known there might be complications, but she and Daniel had approached it with the optimism of people who believe that wanting something hard enough is a form of preparation. It wasn't. The first year was tests and consultations and cautious hope. The second year was treatments and waiting and the specific cruelty of hope that keeps arriving and keeps being wrong. By the third year, Renata had been through 2 rounds of IVF, 1 chemical pregnancy, and 1 loss at 8 weeks that she described to me, once, in a voice so flat and controlled that it was more devastating than crying would have been. I was the person she called. Not her own sister. Not her mother. She called me. I would go over. I would sit with her. Sometimes we talked and sometimes we didn't. And I learned during those years that the most useful thing you can do for someone in grief is simply refuse to leave. Just stay. Just be a body in the room that loves them. I loved her. I want to be clear about that, because what comes later is going to make it complicated, and I need you to understand that my feelings for Renata were real, and they were deep, and they did not disappear when I learned the truth. They just became something much harder to carry. Daniel was quieter about the grief. He processed it the way he processed most things, internally, methodically. He was devoted to Renata through all of it. He went to every appointment. He researched every option. He was, by every visible measure, exactly the husband she needed. I admired him for it. I admired him. I met Caleb when I was 24 at a gallery opening. He was tall and dark-haired and had the kind of easy confidence that fills a room without demanding it. He worked in finance, the quieter, more analytical kind. He was funny in a dry, understated way. He remembered things, small things, the kind of details that people mention once and don't expect anyone to retain. He made you feel, when he was paying attention to you, like you were the most interesting thing in the room. I fell for him the way you fall for someone when you're 24 and you haven't yet learned to be careful. Completely, quickly, and with a trust that felt like certainty. We dated for 2 years. They were good years. He met my family. My mother liked him. Daniel liked him more than I expected. They had lunches sometimes, the 2 of them, which I found sweet. My boyfriend and my brother, building a friendship. I thought it meant Caleb was serious about me. I thought it meant he was investing in my life. I was right that he was investing in something. I just had the wrong noun. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday in October, 2 years into our relationship. I was 26 years old. I was sitting on the edge of my bathtub in my terracotta apartment, holding a test I'd bought at the pharmacy, telling myself it was probably nothing. It was not negative. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the light in the bathroom to shift from afternoon to early evening. I sat there in the fading light, and I put my hand on my stomach and I thought, okay, we figure this out. I called Caleb. He came over within the hour. He sat across from me on the couch. I notice now that all the important conversations also seem to happen on couches, and I told him, and I watched his face. He went still. Not the stillness of shock exactly. It was a different kind of stillness, the kind that comes from a person who is very quickly and very quietly reorganizing their internal world, calculating, deciding. He said, "Okay, we'll figure it out." The words were right. The tone was right. But his eyes were doing something else entirely, and I saw it, and I filed it away in the part of my brain that notices things I'm not ready to deal with yet. I told myself he just needed time. I told Daniel and Renata 2 weeks later, over dinner at their house. Daniel hugged me, long and tight, the way he hugged me when things mattered. He said he was happy for me. Renata smiled. I have thought about that smile 10,000 times since then. I have turned it over and examined it from every angle, trying to determine what it was made of. At the time, I read it as bittersweet. A woman who wanted a child more than anything, watching her sister-in-law announce a pregnancy she hadn't planned. I felt guilty for being happy in front of her. I almost apologized. Now I think about that smile differently. Now I think it was the smile of a woman who already knew something I didn't. A woman who had already had a conversation I wasn't part of. A woman who was looking at my pregnancy and seeing, not a loss for herself, but a solution. But I didn't know that then. Then, I just felt guilty for being happy. And I went home and I talked to the baby and I told her that things were going to be fine. I believed it when I said it. I want you to know that. I genuinely believed it. The pregnancy changed things in ways I expected and ways I didn't. I expected the physical part. The exhaustion that hit me like a wall every afternoon, the nausea that was all day and no warning, the way my body seemed to be operating on a completely different set of priorities. I expected my life to start reorganizing itself around this new reality. What I didn't expect was how alone I would feel inside it. Caleb was present. I want to be accurate about that. He didn't disappear. He came to the first appointment. He held my hand in the waiting room. He asked the right questions and made me tea without being asked. But something had shifted. The warmth that had always been there had developed a slight distance behind it, like a window that had fogged over just enough to blur the view. You could still see through it, but not clearly. I told myself it was stress. I didn't know yet that what I was sensing wasn't adjustment. It was calculation. He started spending more time with Daniel around the 4th month. Not dramatically more, just lunches here and there, an evening out once or twice. Phone calls that he took in the other room. I found it sweet, actually. My boyfriend and my brother, growing closer. I thought it meant Caleb was building roots. I thought it meant he was choosing us. I should have asked what they talked about. I should have asked even once. I didn't. Daniel started coming around more too, dropping by my apartment on weekends, offering to help with things, assembling the bookshelf for the nursery corner, carrying groceries up the 3 flights of stairs. He was attentive in the way he'd always been, and I accepted it without question because that was who Daniel was. That was who I believed he was. Renata called more frequently, checking in, asking how I was feeling, whether I was sleeping, whether I needed anything. The attention felt like love. I soaked it in. I told my mother that Renata was being so wonderful, so supportive, and my mother said, "She's a good woman," in a tone I couldn't quite read at the time. I understand that tone now. I understand it completely. It was around the 6th month that I started feeling something I couldn't name, not physically. The baby was growing steadily and healthily. No, this was something else. A low-frequency unease that I kept trying to locate and kept failing to pin down. I mentioned it to Caleb one evening. I was sitting on the kitchen counter watching him make dinner, and I said, "I feel like something's off. I can't explain it. I just feel like something's not right." He didn't look up from the stove. He said, quote 3. And he was so calm about it, so reasonable. And I thought, he's right. I'm hormonal and anxious, and I'm projecting. I thought, this is what anxiety does. It manufactures threats where there aren't any. I was half right. There was a threat. I just had the source completely wrong. The unease didn't go away. It sat in the back of my chest like a stone. I started sleeping badly. A specific kind of restlessness, the kind that comes from a brain that is trying to solve a problem it hasn't consciously identified yet. One night, I woke up at 2 in the morning and lay in the dark. Was it the pregnancy? Caleb? Work? The apartment? I couldn't land on anything specific. That stone was my instincts trying to tell me something. I wish I had known how to listen. The phone call happened on a Wednesday evening in my 7th month. Caleb was in the living room. I was in the bedroom, lying down, and the door was not fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen. I was in that soft in-between state that pregnancy had made familiar. His voice came through the gap in the door. Low, careful. I caught fragments. Quote 4. A pause. Quote 5. And then the sound of him realizing, or perhaps just deciding to be more careful, and his voice dropping below the threshold of anything I could make out. I lay there, fully awake now. The drowsiness gone in an instant, replaced by something sharp and cold. I listened to the silence and I thought, what was that? I heard him end the call. I heard him come to the bedroom doorway. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing slow and even, and I felt him stand there for a moment. Just a moment. And then he went back to the living room. She won't remember if. She won't remember if what? I told myself it was a work call. I told myself I'd misheard. I was very good at telling myself things by then. When I came out 20 minutes later, I asked him who he'd been talking to. He said it was a work call, a colleague dealing with a difficult client. Nothing interesting. He said it easily, naturally. I said, quote 6, and I stood at the kitchen sink and I thought, I believe him. And then, quieter, underneath that, do I? I pushed the question down. I buried it under a layer of deliberate trust and pregnancy exhaustion. Caleb started insisting on driving me to every appointment after that. He framed it as care. He said he wanted to be more involved. I didn't understand then that his reasons had nothing to do with care. He needed to know what was happening. He needed to be the one controlling the information. My OB was Dr. Ferris, warm, direct. Caleb was polite to her in the careful, slightly formal way he was polite to people he was managing. At the appointment in my 32nd week, Dr. Ferris mentioned that she'd be going on a planned leave in my 36th week, and that I'd be transferred to her colleague. Caleb asked the colleague's name, and Dr. Ferris told him. He nodded and said nothing else. I didn't think anything of it. It was only later, much later, that I would understand why he needed that name. My mother came to stay with me for a week in my 8th month. One evening, she looked up from her knitting and said, out of nowhere, "Are you happy, Maya? Not are you excited or are you ready? Just, are you happy?" I looked up from my sketchbook. "Of course," I said. "Why?" She looked at me for a moment with those steady, dark eyes that had always seen more than I wanted them to. Then she looked back down. "No reason," she said. "I just want to make sure." I thought she was asking about the logistics of parenthood. I didn't know she was asking something else entirely. I didn't know that my mother was carrying a weight that had nothing to do with ordinary maternal worry. The last normal week of my life was unremarkable. I worked on a logo project. I had lunch with a friend. I argued mildly with Caleb about something small. I went to bed on Thursday night at 10 o'clock, and I lay in the dark with my hand on my stomach, and I talked to the baby. I told her I was almost ready. I told her that she was going to be loved. I fell asleep, and I didn't know that in less than 2 weeks, I would be in a hospital bed, and I would be told something that would hollow me out completely, and I would spend the next 10 years grieving a loss that was never real. I didn't know any of that. I just slept. I want to tell you about the last thing I remember clearly. It is a small detail. Insignificant, probably, in the architecture of everything that came after. But I have held on to it for 10 years the way you hold on to the last ordinary thing before an accident. I was in the hospital bed. Early morning. The light was that particular shade of institutional gray. the color of a world that hasn't decided yet what kind of day it's going to be. I had been admitted the night before. There had been a quote, 12. My blood pressure had spiked significantly. The decision had been made to induce. I was 36 weeks. Not full term, but close enough, they said. Close enough that the baby would be fine. And the last thing I remember clearly is the feel of the hospital blanket under my hands. Rough and warm and slightly stiff. I remember pressing my palms flat against it and thinking, by tonight, she'll be here. By tonight, everything changes. I remember feeling ready. And then something happened. Something went wrong. I don't mean with the delivery. I mean with me, with my consciousness. I felt a heaviness descend that was different from exhaustion. It was thick and sudden and total, like a curtain being drawn across a window. I remember thinking, distantly, that this didn't feel right, that I wanted to say something but my mouth wasn't cooperating. And then there was nothing. I came back slowly. First sound, a low, steady beeping. Then light, too bright. Then the feeling of my own body, heavy and distant. I opened my eyes. Caleb was sitting in the chair beside the bed. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. I didn't have a name for it then. I have a name for it now. Relief that the hard part was over. Not the hard part of labor, the hard part of what he'd done. He took my hand. He said, quote 13. I looked around the room. I felt the absence before I understood it. The specific physical wrongness of a body that had been full and was now empty. There was no baby. There was no sound. I looked at Caleb. I knew it before he said a word. A cold, absolute certainty settled over me. His eyes were wet. He had arranged his face into an expression of grief. Quote 14. He stopped. He pressed his lips together. Quote underscore 15. He looked down at our joined hands. Quote underscore 16. I want to tell you what happened next, but the honest answer is that I don't fully know. There is a smearing in my memory, the way a photograph smears when the camera moves. I know I made a sound. I know I asked to see her. I want to see her. I want to hold her. And Caleb pulled back slightly and said, They took her, Maya. It happened very fast. They said it would be better. The doctors said it would be better if you didn't. Better if you didn't. Better if you didn't see her. Better if you didn't hold her. Better if you didn't have the chance to say hello and goodbye at the same time. They had decided it would be better. They had decided. I didn't fight it. That is the thing I have had to forgive myself for. Slowly, over many years. I didn't fight it. I was sedated and devastated, and the person I trusted most in the world was telling me this was how it was. I believed him. I didn't know yet that belief was exactly what they were counting on. The days after the hospital are a blur. Daniel came and sat with me, quietly and steadily. My mother came and stayed for 2 weeks, making food I didn't eat, answering phone calls I didn't want to take. Caleb was there, and then gradually less there, and then, over the following weeks, not there at all. The relationship ended quietly. He cited the grief, the distance. He was always kind about it. He was the kind of man who could do monstrous things and remain, on the surface, perfectly kind. I didn't understand then why he left so cleanly. I thought it was because the grief had broken something between us. It was because he had gotten what he needed. There was nothing left to stay for. I grieved. I carried it into my 30s. I built a life. A good one, actually. My studio grew. I moved into a better apartment. I was not a woman defined by her loss, but the loss was always there. A room in the house of myself that I kept closed. I didn't know the room was empty. I didn't know she was alive. 3 months after the hospital, Daniel and Renata announced they were adopting. Daniel made the announcement with a kind of careful joy. Renata was luminous. They said it was a private adoption. A young mother, they said. Someone who couldn't cope. The baby was already born. A girl, 3 weeks old. My mother made a sound. A small, soft sound. I thought she was moved by the beauty of it. I know now what that sound was. She was looking at me across the dinner table, looking at what had been taken from me and given to them. She was making the sound of a woman who is keeping a secret that is destroying her, but I didn't know that then. I cried at that dinner. Happy tears, I said. Renata reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said, "You're going to love her, Maya." She was right. She just knew something about why that I wouldn't understand for 10 more years. I met Lily when she was 3 weeks and 4 days old. Renata placed her in my arms, and I looked down at her face, and something happened in my chest that I did not have a name for. It was not the ordinary warmth of holding a friend's baby. It was something older, something that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to the part of me that was animal and instinctive. I held her, and I did not want to give her back. I remember being embarrassed by the intensity of it. I thought, this is because of the loss. This is your body responding to a baby because you lost one. I handed her back. I was wrong about what it was. I was wrong about almost everything. She had my mother's eyes. I noticed it when her features settled. Those eyes, dark and steady and slightly too knowing for a baby. I mentioned it to Daniel once. Quote, 20. Quote, Daniel looked at me for just a fraction of a second longer than the comment warranted, then he smiled. Quote, 21. Quote, I accepted that. I didn't know yet that genetics hadn't skipped anywhere, that those eyes were exactly where they were supposed to be. I went home and called my mother and told her, and she was quiet for a moment and then she said, quote, 22. Just that. Yes. I noticed. I let it pass. I have thought about that moment so many times, that door I didn't open. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had. Here is what 10 years looks like when you don't know what you're living through. It looks like Sunday dinners. It looks like birthday parties with homemade cakes and slightly uneven frosting. It looks like a little girl falling asleep on your couch with her shoes still on, and you sitting beside her in the lamplight, not wanting to move because moving might wake her, and you are not ready for the evening to end. It looks like ordinary love. That's the thing nobody tells you about the most devastating betrayals. They don't announce themselves. They hide inside the most ordinary moments of your life, and you walk through those moments feeling nothing but gratitude. And the whole time, the truth is sitting right there, patient, waiting. Lily was 2 years old the first time she reached for me in a crowd. We were at a street fair. Daniel, Renata, Lily, and me. Lily had been overwhelmed by the noise and started to cry. Renata reached for her immediately, and Lily, this 2-year-old girl who had every reason to reach for the woman who had been her mother since birth, turned her head and reached for me, both arms, straight toward me, certain. Renata's face did something complicated. She recovered quickly and laughed it off. I took Lily and she stopped crying almost immediately, her small fist curled in my hair. I told myself it was because I was the quote, 23, I didn't know it was something older than that. Something that was simply recognition. She was 4 when she started calling me Aunt Maya, with a particular emphasis. She would introduce me to her friends. This is my Aunt Maya. She's different from my mom. When asked what she meant, Lily said, Aunt Maya feels like home, but also like an adventure. She wasn't describing her aunt, she was describing her mother. The years moved with the illusion of continuity. She called me at midnight for the first time when she was 7. A nightmare. She called my cell phone, not her parents. I stayed on the line until her breathing slowed. Underscore, underscore, quote underscore 27 underscore underscore, I told her. After I hung up, the thought arrived with that same fierce force. I would do anything for this child. I never questioned why. I just accepted that she belonged to me. She always had. When Lily was 9, she learned about genetics in school. At Sunday dinner, she interrogated the family about eye color and hair texture. Then she looked at me. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 28, underscore, underscore. The table went quiet. Not dramatically, just a fractional pause. Renata laughed first. Daniel said family resemblance was funny and, quote, 29, quote. I said nothing for a moment, looking at her dark, steady eyes and the shape of her hands. Quote 30, quote. I said finally. Quote 31, quote. My mother got sick when Lily was 11. During those last 3 years, my mother and Lily developed a conspiracy of affection. My mother would request Lily specifically. I watched them together and felt warmth. I didn't understand that my mother was looking at Lily with love and guilt in equal measure. She was looking at what had been taken from me and given to them. In the last year of her life, my mother told me, Maya, you were always the one with the heart too big for her body. I mean it now more than I ever did. She looked at me with Lily's eyes, and there was something in them that looked like it was trying to become words and couldn't quite make it. She was standing at the edge of a confession she couldn't make herself cross into. She died on a Tuesday morning in March. Her last coherent words were directed at Lily. You have good eyes, my love. Use them. I thought it was a blessing. I know now she was telling Lily to look, to find the truth that the adults were too cowardly to speak. Lily was 15 when she called me about a boy who had broken her heart. I sat on my bathroom floor and listened to her cry. She asked me, Aunt Maya, why do I always call you first? It's like there's a rule somewhere that says, when things are bad, I call you. Maybe there is, I said. Maybe some rules just exist without anyone writing them down. The last family dinner before Lily's 18th birthday was 3 weeks ago. Lily was talking about her plans. She'd been accepted to a design program. Design. I had studied design. I looked at her across the table and felt that familiar thought. I would do anything for this child. And then, underneath it, a new question. Why does it feel like this? Not like an aunt, but like something that has no category? I stopped the thought. I picked up my wine glass. I didn't know that 3 weeks later, sitting at my own kitchen table with a half-eaten birthday cake, I would finally find out why. The morning of Lily's 18th birthday, I woke up early. 5:53 in the morning. I lay there looking at the ceiling, and I felt something I couldn't immediately name. Anticipation, maybe. I didn't know, standing there in the blue pre-dawn light, that this birthday was going to be the last day of the life I thought I was living. I baked the cake that morning. Chocolate, because some things are constants and constants are sacred. The left side came out slightly uneven, the way it always did. I stood back and felt a rush of love so strong it was almost grief. I didn't know why it felt that way. I do now. The party was at Daniel and Renata's house. Lily met me at the door and took the box. Left side's uneven again, she said. It's a feature, not a flaw, I replied. She laughed. That sound I had been hearing for 18 years without understanding why it felt like it belonged to me. I would give anything to go back to that moment, to have 5 more minutes of the before. The afternoon was genuinely good. Lily moved through the room with the ease of someone who feels completely loved. But then I noticed something. Lily was watching Daniel. Not with the easy affection of a daughter, but with the watching of someone who is waiting for something they dread. I didn't know she had been watching him for 6 months, waiting to see if he would do what she had decided she would have to do herself if he didn't. By 9 o'clock the friends were gone. It was just the 4 of us. Daniel, Renata, Lily, and me. The cake was half eaten. Renata said she was tired and excused herself. She didn't look at Daniel when she left. She simply left the room as though he wasn't in it. Something was wrong. I could feel the pressure shift. I didn't know then that Renata had known for weeks what Daniel was planning to do. Her going upstairs was an inability to be in the room when it happened. Daniel said quietly, "Maya, can you sit down for a minute?" Something in his voice. I have known Daniel's voice my entire life, but this was a register I had never heard. It was the voice of a man who has been carrying something for so long that putting it down has become its own kind of violence. I sat down. Lily stopped moving. She was standing at the edge of the kitchen, holding 2 plates, and she went very still. And I looked at her stillness and something cold moved through me. She knew. The same instinct that had always connected us told me. She knows what he's about to say. Daniel's hands were flat on the table. He wasn't looking at me. The room was so quiet I could hear the waxy stumps of the candles. He said, "There's something I should have told you a decade ago." A pause. "She's yours." I want to tell you what happened in the 30 seconds after those words. It was more physical than understanding. My hands went cold. The room seemed to contract. Every detail sharpened. The grain of the wood, the smear of frosting on the plate. I looked at Lily. Her eyes, those dark, steady eyes, my mother's eyes, my eyes, were fixed on me with an expression of someone who has been waiting to be found. I felt the world rearrange itself. I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat there and felt that thought arrive for the 1,000th time, and for the first time in 10 years, I understood what it had always been. It wasn't the love of an aunt. It had never been the love of an aunt. Daniel finally looked up. I saw the expression of a man who has been living inside a wrong thing for so long that it has become the architecture of his life. I said, "Tell me." He told me. He told me there was no miscarriage. He told me she was alive when they took her. He told me she had cried, immediately, with the full-throated certainty of a baby who intends to be known. He had been in the room. He had heard it. And he had let them take her anyway. I heard that, and I felt something break in me. She was alive, and she cried, and I was in a hospital bed being told she was gone, and nobody came to get me. Nobody came. I asked Daniel to leave around midnight. The door closed behind him, and Lily and I were alone in the kitchen for the first time. She was still standing where she'd been. I looked at her. She looked at me. I thought about the street fair when she was 2, reaching for me. I thought about the midnight phone calls. I thought about my mother's voice. "You have good eyes, my love. Use them." She had been talking to both of us. I said, "Come here." And Lily crossed the kitchen, and I held her the way I had held her when she was 2, and I understood for the first time that I had been holding my daughter for 18 years without knowing it. The grief and the love arrived at exactly the same moment. I couldn't tell them apart. I'm not sure I was supposed to. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table after Lily left, and I sat there until the deep blue of early morning came back around. I thought, this morning I was a different person. That's the thing about revelations that restructure everything. They don't just change the future, they reach backward. They rearrange the furniture in every room of your past. I let the first truth settle. She was mine. The baby I had grieved for 10 years was alive and had been in the same rooms as me, eating birthday cake, calling me at midnight. And then, because I am the woman my mother described, the one with the heart too big for her body, I started asking the questions Daniel's confession hadn't answered. How? Not just what happened, but the mechanics, the specific, deliberate steps. I didn't know yet how much worse the picture was going to get. The first breadcrumb was the one I found by accident. 3 days after the birthday, I was at Daniel's house. Renata was away. I let myself in with my spare key and sat in the living room. Then, an instinct pulled me. I went to the small desk in the corner, the one Daniel used for household paperwork. I opened the top drawer. I found a manila folder. Inside was a collection of medical documents. I was about to close it when a date caught my eye. It was on a document from the private adoption agency. The placement record listed the date as 3 days after Lily's birth. Daniel and Renata had announced the adoption when Lily was 3 weeks old. They had said the baby was already born, but this document proved they had her 3 days after the hospital. They had been in the process before the announcement, before the quote, 46 dinner. The story of the quote 47 had been constructed, assembled, designed. Daniel arrived 12 minutes later. I didn't tell him what I'd found. I watched him make coffee and I waited. He told me about Caleb. He said Caleb had approached him in my 6th month. He said Caleb didn't want the child and wanted a way out. I remembered the fragments of the phone call. She won't remember if she was sedated. She won't remember if she didn't see the baby. I had been right, and I had buried it, and they had counted on that. Daniel said their years of infertility made him capable of something he wouldn't otherwise have done. He said it like an excuse. I asked, "Who else knew?" He said, "Renata, obviously." "Who else?" "The doctor," he said. "The one who took over from Dr. Ferris." The name Caleb had asked for. The colleague. This wasn't a tragedy of desperation. It was a plan. The second breadcrumb came from Lily. She called me 4 days after the birthday. She came to my apartment and put her phone on the table. On the screen was a photograph of a photograph. It showed a hospital room, a woman in a bed, a baby. The woman was me. I was holding Lily. I was looking at her with an expression of a woman who had been waiting her whole life. I had no memory of this. I had been sedated, but I had been conscious enough to hold her, and then they had taken her and told me she was gone. Quote, 55? Quote, I asked. Quote, 56? Quote, Lily said. Quote, 57? Quote, Lily had been 16 when she found that photo. She had carried it for 2 years, protecting me. My daughter had been protecting me. The third breadcrumb broke the truth open. I requested my own medical records from the hospital. When they arrived, I found the first anomaly on page 4, the medication log. The dosage was not consistent with a standard labor complication. It was consistent with something deliberate. I had been sedated so that I would not be present for what happened next. On page 7, the attending physician was not the colleague Caleb had asked for. It was a name that didn't appear in any current medical registry, a doctor who had surrendered his license 18 months later. Caleb had ensured the right person was not in the room so that the person who was there could be bought. Then, on page 12, consent for transfer of care documented separately. I had been unconscious. I hadn't signed anything, which meant someone else had. Someone with the legal standing, or forged documents, to sign on my behalf. I thought about who was in that hospital. I thought about my mother. Quote, 59? Quote, she had said about Lily's eyes. Quote, 60? Quote, she had told Lily on her deathbed. I called Daniel, he said. The silence was a collapse. He said, I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about my mother. I thought about her knitting needles and her careful eyes. She had signed the form and spent 14 years trying to find a way to quote 69 it. Her dying instruction to Lily was the closest she could get to a confession. We had both been carrying the same wound from opposite sides. Now she was gone, and there was no one left to be angry at who could hear me. But underneath it all, there was one thing I held on to. She had been loved. By Renata, by Daniel, by my mother, and by me. It didn't make it right, but it was the thing that made the rest survivable. There is a specific kind of morning that comes after the worst nights. Not a redemptive morning, just an ordinary one, gray and indifferent. The coffee maker makes the same sound. The world has not registered that your life has been restructured, and there is something both insulting and deeply comforting about that. I want to be honest about the aftermath. We do a disservice when we skip from revelation to resolution as though the distance is short. It isn't. It is a long, unglamorous stretch of days where you have to keep functioning while carrying a new, fundamental weight. Lily came to see me every few days. She would let herself in with the key I'd given her for quote, _70, __. She would make tea or sit across from me at the kitchen table and just be present. She was studying design. My daughter was studying design. It had happened without anyone engineering it. She had inherited it the way you inherit things that live in the body, rather than the biography. I had looked at her sketchbooks for years and felt a quote, _7, 1, _. It wasn't shared interest. It was inheritance. One evening, she was showing me a branding project. I looked up and found her watching me. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. I like watching you think. I have a name for that feeling now. The irreplaceable feeling of being seen by your own child. I had been feeling it for 18 years. I was only now learning to call it what it was. Daniel and I did not speak for 3 weeks. I thought about him constantly, not with clean anger, but with the complicated grief of losing a brother while finding a betrayer. He had told himself a story where the harm he caused was a form of care. He, Caleb, and my mother had all constructed stories, and I had lived inside them for a decade. Renata called 3.5 weeks after the birthday. "I want you to know that I loved her," she said. "I never let her feel anything but completely loved." I believed her. That was the complicated part. "She used to ask for you," Renata whispered. "When she was very small, she would just reach. Toward the door, toward the phone. I knew what she was reaching for. I always knew." "She found her way to me anyway," I said. "It was not forgiveness. It was the beginning of the long, complicated work that comes before forgiveness." I went to my mother's grave on a Tuesday morning in October. I stood there and felt the anger, the hardest anger, because she was the one I would have called if I'd known. She had been in the room, and she had signed the form, and then she had sat across from me for 14 years and asked, "Are you happy, Maya?" I said out loud to the sharp October air, "I understand why you couldn't. I don't forgive it yet, but I understand why you couldn't." She had tried to fix it sideways. "Use your eyes." She had passed the truth down like a thread, hoping it would eventually lead to this. It was not enough, but it was everything she had. In November, Lily and I sat at my kitchen table. She asked me, "Are you angry at Grandma?" "Yes," I said. "And no. Both." Lily nodded. I think she was ashamed. She loved us both so much, and she was so ashamed of what she'd done that she couldn't find a way to say it directly. I looked at my daughter and realized she had my mother's capacity for sitting with complicated truths. "She loved you," I said. That part was never in question. I called Daniel in December. I told him, "I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I'll ever be. But you're my brother, and Lily loves you, and I am not going to let what you did take that from her too." It was not reconciliation. It was the first step of a very long walk. The last thing I want to tell you about is a morning in January. Lily had stayed over and fallen asleep on my couch with her shoes still on. I woke up to that same pre-dawn blue. I heard her stir. "Aunt Maya," she rasped, rough with sleep. I turned from the window. She was sitting up, working up to something. "I've been thinking," she said slowly. About what I call you. I know it's not simple. I'm not trying to make it simple. But I've been calling you the wrong thing for 18 years. And I'd like to try calling you something else. The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee maker made it sound. Okay, I said. She looked at me. Mom, she said. Just that. One word. The oldest word. The word that had been true from her first breath. From the street fair. From the midnight calls. I crossed the room and sat beside her, and I held her. And I understood. Completely. Finally. That I had been holding my daughter for 18 years. And I was never going to stop. The grief and the love arrived at exactly the same moment. The way they always had. The way, I think, they always will. But this time, for the first time, the love was louder.